Hi, my name is Victoria Sparks. I'm the band and life skills teacher. And so I'm going to read a book. It's called The Bailey School Kids, The Abominable Snowman Doesn't Roast Marshmallows. So it's kind of a fun book. It's a shorter chapter book. So I'm going to read this over probably 3 different videos. So feel free to grab a blanket or your stuffed animal, or even some Legos or crayons. A lot of my students draw when I'm reading, when my staff reads, or when I read. So feel free to do that, and feel free to listen to the book. The first chapter is called Blizzard. "Watch out!" Eddie yelled. But he was too late. The school bus drove by and splashed Melody, Howie, and Liza. "You guys look like kidsicles," Eddie said with a snicker. Liza shivered as an icicle formed on her nose. "It's not funny. You'd think that bus driver would watch where he was going." "Maybe he gets extra money from the school board if he splashes kids," Eddie said with a laugh. The kids looked both ways before crossing Delaware Boulevard on their way home from school. Snow already covered the streets and sidewalks, and more continued to fall. It even covered the red freckles on Eddie's nose. "Maybe we'll get a snow day out of this," Eddie said hopefully. Liza shook her head. "My mother told me that it would have to be really bad before we missed any more school. We've already missed too many days for snow this year." Eddie sighed and shook the bushes on the corner. Huge blobs of snow popped on the ground. "I'm so cold. My goosebumps are trying to fly south for the winter," Melody said, rubbing the damp sleeves of her winter coat. "Nobody was expecting this much snow," Howie said. "The weatherman on WMTJ said the weather patterns around the world have been unusual lately. In fact," Howie continued, "the Himalayan mountains are expecting a strange warm spell." Eddie stared at his friends. Howie was a smart kid who wanted to be a doctor when he grew up, but sometimes he still surprised Eddie. "How do you know all these things?" Eddie asked. So there's the kids waiting for the bus and getting splashed with water. Howie shrugged. "You can learn a lot from TV if you watch the right channels." "I'm glad we aren't having a warm spell," Liza said. "The annual Winter Festival wouldn't seem right without snow." Every year, Bailey City held a winter carnival, complete with a parade, a snow sculpture contest, snowball fights, a human dog sled race. The carnival was just a few days away, and the kids were looking forward to all the competitions. Melody knocked a pile of white stuff off her black pigtails. "A little snow would be okay, but this is ridiculous." Wet snow pelted the kids so hard they could barely see the sidewalk. "Why don't you guys come over to my house?" Howie suggested. "We could get started on our snow sculptures." "Great idea," Eddie said. "We've got to come up with something something that will beat the Weird family over on Deadman Street." His friends nodded. They knew exactly who he meant. So there's Eddie and his idea for snow sculptures, and Liza. Last year, a family living in a rundown house had made a haunted ice village on their front lawn. The judges took one look and gave them first prize. "Don't worry," Eddie continued. "I've got it all planned out. We'll fill Howie's yard with snow monsters." Liza shook her head so hard her cap slipped off her blonde hair. "I want to make an ice princess castle." Eddie glared at Liza. "That's the silliest thing I've ever heard. Snow monsters are much cooler." Melody interrupted them before they could say another word. "Maybe we should work on another contest for now," she said. The kids stopped at the corner of Main Street and Delaware Boulevard. It was snowing so hard the streetlights had come on. "Holy Toledo!" Eddie shouted, totally ignoring Melody. "Look at that!" Chapter 2, Great Balls of Fire. "Oh my gosh!" Liza screeched. "It's a forest fire!" In the empty lot across Main Street, the kids could plainly see a roaring blaze. The red flames stood out against the white ground, like a flashing electric sign. Eddie rolled his eyes. "We're not in a forest." "Well, it's a fire," Liza said. Melody nodded. "We have to call for help fast before it spreads to one of the houses." "Great balls of fire!" Eddie screamed. "Help! Help!" Melody punched Eddie in the arm. "Not here, you dope. We have to go to the phone and call the fire department." The kids tried to run, but it was slow going in their winter boots. They only made it a few feet before through the drifting snow before they were panting, and their boots were filled with snow. Yuck, Eddie snapped. I'm turning into Frosty the Tow Man. The city will burn down before we get to the phone, Liza shrieked. Won't the snow put out the fire first? Melody wondered. Wait, just a minute, Howie said, squinting through the falling snow. That's no wildfire. That's a huge campfire. In the middle of a snowstorm, Liza squeaked. In the middle of town, Melody asked. Nobody is that crazy, Eddie said. It looked like someone is. And there's the guy, Howie said, pointing out the shape of a huge man hunched over the fire. Through the swirling snow, the kids spotted this very large shadow besides the roaring flames. So there is the kids and you can't see the fire, and the guy sitting there. Hey, I think you're right, Eddie said. That is a guy, a very big guy. Every person with half a brain is staying inside on a day like this, Melody said. The wind changed directions and blew directly in her face. She sputtered to catch her breath. Maybe that poor guy doesn't have a home to go to, Liza said, over the blowing winds. He's got to be a nutcase, Melody said, shaking her head. This time, the winds blew so hard she fell onto her rear end. Eddie laughed. Maybe you're the nutcase. Let's go see this man. No, Liza squealed. Eddie didn't like listening to anyone but himself. He headed across the street, right for the mysterious stranger. Chapter 3, Savage. Hi, my name's Eddie, and these are my friends, Melody and Howie. Liza is the girl behind Melody. How do you do? Liza asked in a very small voice. The giant man didn't even glance up at the four kids. Hunched over the fire, he looked like a cross between a polar bear and an ape. He wore a fuzzy white hat and gloves. Even his boots were made of thick, warm fur. Shaggy blonde hair peeked out from beneath his hat, and a fine layer of frost covered the beard on his face. In places, the frost had melted from the heat of the fire, and water dribbled down his face. He held a stick over the flames. On the tip of the stick sat 3 plump marshmallows. What's your name? Eddie asked. The man slowly turned his head. He stared at the 4 kids long enough for snowflakes to cling to his eyelashes. Savage, he said, finally. Call me Savage. His words were muddled by a thick accent, and his voice was as deep as a tuba. You want, he said. The man held the stick out, now covered in honey-colored roasted marshmallows. Awesome, Eddie said, reaching out for one. Liza pulled Eddie's hands back. Sorry, Mr. Savage, she said. We can't take anything from strangers. The man shrugged in his huge fur-covered shoulders and popped 3 marshmallows into his mouth. As soon as he finished chewing, he turned back to the fire as if the kids were nothing more than a bothersome flea. He jabbed some more marshmallows on the stick and held them over the fire. I don't think talking to Mr. Savage is such a good idea, Liza whispered in Melody's ear. What if he's a cat burglar or a bank robber? What if he's an axe murderer? So there's Mr. Savage eating marshmallows. Even if he isn't, Melody whispered back, he's still a stranger, and we should leave him alone. Eddie, on the other hand, couldn't hear their whispers. He kicked through the snow to get even closer to Mr. Savage. That's a big fire, Eddie said. It sure looks warm. I didn't think we were allowed to build fires in the middle of town. Kids, the man grunted slowly, shaking his shaggy head, should never build fires. Eddie grinned. I bet I could build a fire, a big fire, a fire big enough to melt the snow, all the snow in Bailey City. The man turned so fast that a shower of snow fell from his enormous shoulders and sprayed Eddie. No, Mr. Savage growled. No fires for kids. Yikes, Liza whispered. We'd better get out of here before he stomps Eddie into slush. Howie nodded and grabbed Eddie's sleeves just as a huge man rose to his feet. Mr. Savage stood as tall as a nearby tree and as massive as a boulder. Melody couldn't take her eyes off the gigantic stranger. Howie could. He looked around for a quick escape. When he did, he couldn't believe what he saw. So that's the end of chapter 3. We'll have to wait.